Hi grade 10s, it's me, your teacher. So the last time I saw you, we did the glossary of European expansion and conquest. Just give me a moment, this thing's being weird. Where we discussed the various words that are going to be appearing in this unit. Some of the main words you need to know are the words colonialism, economy, empire, independence, tribute, just some very important words that you need to know. So what we're going to be doing today is the reasons for European expansion. So if Europe is so amazing, why did all the Europeans leave Europe to come to other countries? And it can be basically boiled down into about 4 or 5 different reasons. Let's look at the first reason, which, well, it's not necessarily the first reason, but it's the first reason that I have in my notes over here. So, Europeans wanted to find a more secure and less expensive way to access spices in India. So at this point, many of you will remember about the VOC and the Dutch East India Company. In order to get to other countries, many of the Europeans were traveling over land routes. So I just want to show you the overland route from Europe to Asia. So like I explained to you, the overland route from Europe to Asia was basically the Silk Road was one of them, and basically the way it was how the Europeans traveled in order to get spices from India. But the problem with these overland routes is that you had to pay a toll, so you had to pay money to use them. And many Europeans wanted to find a different way to use it. Sometimes also what would happen to them is as they traveled on this road, they would get robbed, and by the time they reach their destination, they've got half their stock. So they wanted to find a way to get to India without crossing this route over here. And as a result, you can see they started using sea routes. Right? So they would go across here, down here, through here, and eventually it got to the point where certain sea routes were also all taken. So they had to find a different way to get to India. You will remember with the VOC, they went around the point of the Cape. So basically, why were the Europeans trying to get to Asia, trying to get to India? Because they had to pay high prices to traders from the Middle East for bringing goods across Asia and then across the Mediterranean Sea. So they were kind of trying to avoid having to pay those taxes. So why were they trying to get there? Because in Europe they didn't have access to spices. Everything was very plain there. So they needed things like salt, nutmeg, and cloves to preserve their meat, and others wanted things like pepper, saffron, cinnamon, and vanilla to add taste to their food. So they needed to go to India to get these ingredients because it wasn't produced in Europe. They also wanted other commodities that they couldn't buy in Europe, such as tea, coffee, sugar, vegetable oils, rubber, and cotton. So once again, not things that the Europeans produce themselves, but things they get from other countries. They also wanted minerals such as gold, silver, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and ivory. So in order to control these resources, areas needed to be colonized. Because, like I said, gold, silver, diamonds, emerald, rubies were not necessarily found in Europe. They were found in other countries around the world. And in order for Europe to control these resources, they needed to control these countries. So the colonizers made laws to force the indigenous people of these areas to work as slaves, or at the very least for very, very low wages, so that they could make as much profit as they possibly could. When raw materials were imported from the colonies, they were converted to manufactured goods, which were then sold back to the colonies for a profit. Isn't that absolutely insane? So economic causes of European expansion basically just boils down to they wanted money. They wanted to save money by not using the overland routes such as the Silk Road and having to pay prices to traders. And they wanted to get money by getting minerals such as gold, silver, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and ivory. by colonizing different areas that were not originally part of their territory. They also saved money by, instead of hiring their own people to work on these mines or these farms or whatever the case may be, they forced the people that they colonized to work either as slaves or for low wages. Then they made money again by using the things they got from the colony, remember, very, very cheaply because they took over the area. They converted it into manufactured goods, and then they sold these things back to the colony. So think about it this way. You work picking cotton. Your boss takes the cotton, gets it made into a shirt, and then sells the shirt back to you. So they used the colonies basically as a way to make money. And that is why the Europeans left Europe and started colonizing many of the other countries. So that was one of the reasons why the Europeans expanded, economic reasons. Next, we have the technological reasons. So once again, Europeans were kind of basically restricted to their own countries. Many of them in the past believed that the world was flat, and if you keep sailing and sailing and sailing, you'd eventually sail off. But by the time this time comes around, the 1500s, around about there, they realize that actually it's starting to gain traction that the world is actually round, and there might be an easier way to get to India. So some of the technological reasons why Europeans left Europe is that they started to get bigger and better ships. So in the past, their ships couldn't really travel that far. Like, it used to take months and months of sea journeys to reach from one place to another. But now they've got ships that are capable of doing that, called caravels. So they could cross oceans fairly easily. And eventually, the caravels are replaced by something called a galleon, which was longer, narrower, and more maneuverable than a caravel. So they were used as warships, exploration ships, and trade ships. So you can see an example of a galleon over here. And if any of you have watched the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, you can also see an example of caravels and galleons. Alright, so let's move down a bit. Military. So this has to do with how Europeans were able to colonize so easily. So you can imagine, if we had to leave South Africa today and go to Zimbabwe, it's not going to be easy for us to go and take over. Because we both have the same amount of military technology. Okay, South Africa's a little bit better than Zimbabwe in terms of our military. But the idea is we can't just go to another country today and just go and fight them and take over. But back then it was a lot easier because Europeans had weapons, armor, and horses, which was something that indigenous people did not have. So referring back to South Africa, if you think of Khoi San, you don't think of them using guns. You think of them using a spear and a shield. So just think for yourself, what would be better if you were to go to war? Would you be better off with guns, or would you be better off with a spear and shield? And then you can easily see that the Europeans had a military advantage because they had guns, armor, and horses. They also had a longbow, which could fire 3 arrows instead of 1, so even if you miss, maybe the next one will hit, and you don't have to reload your arrow all the time. So Europeans had firearms and gunpowder, and there were a number of inventions to allow them to fire faster, more accurately, and automatically instead of lighting the power themselves. So they invented these guns that could fire very, very quickly. Well, I say quickly, but I'm saying that in the context of the time, quickly for the time. And this actually made it easier for them to kill people and made it easier for them to take over. They also used cannons on the exploration ships because these cannons could fire over large distances. So they didn't even need to leave their ship to go and destroy something that was on the coast, for example. These inventions made it easy for them to colonize the indigenous people. Some of the other advancements they made was in navigation. So remember I told you that Europeans figured out that the world wasn't necessarily flat, it was round. And so they started getting access to things like the compass and the astrolabe and the cross staff. which made it easier for them to travel because they wouldn't get lost. So you always know home is north, and you've now got a device that always points north. So even if you get lost, all you have to do is just travel north and you'll get home. So the astrolabe and the kostrof meant that a navigator could determine the latitude of a ship. Where in the world is this ship at the moment? And then they could then just guide it back. So you've done latitude and longitude in grade 8 and 9 geography. So it's basically your position in the world. So Europeans were able to determine their position in the world and then use that to travel wherever else they wanted to in the world without getting shipwrecked, without getting lost, because they knew this place is at this destination, this place is at that destination. The invention of the compass, astrolabe, and crossstaff helped them with that. Okay, moving down. So some places were taken over because they were important on the trade routes. So earlier I spoke about the VOC and how they left the Netherlands to basically go to India. They didn't want to go overland because, remember, they had to pay the traders that basically like a tax to use their road. Think of it like a toll road, and they didn't want to use that. So they couldn't use the Mediterranean Sea either because that was also being taxed, being tolled. So they decided they're going to try a new route. They are going to go around the tip of Africa and go to India from there. However, this trip was very long, so they needed a pit stop along the way. Think of it like a petrol station. You just stop there, you fill up your tank, get food, you get water, you get what you need, and then you carry on the rest of your journey. So the Cape of Good Hope became a very important place for them to colonize, so that they had a pit stop on their way to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and the East. Another reason why Europeans expanded was the desire for national prestige. So European countries wanted to expand their territory and consolidate their power. So the one that has the most territory is considered the most powerful. And as a result, other people will be less likely to attack you because you've got a lot of territory, you've got a big military, you've got a lot of money, and it makes your country seem so amazing and so glorious. So nationalism made Europeans eager to prove their country was the richest in the world. So they had to leave their country to go colonize places, to get money, to make their countries rich. An increase in wealth meant that new things were invented, military could be expanded, and thus it led to an increase in political power. Other people would just be too afraid to attack your country because you had so much political and military and economic power. So that was one of the reasons why Europeans left Europe. They were looking for glory for their own countries. The next one is the humanitarian agenda. People in Europe thought their way was the best, and anybody that's not like them should be like them. So what they did is they actually wanted to bring their light and their way to the rest of the world. Many of them wanted to show the rest of the world that their way is the best way. So European Christians believed that their rights, their religion was the only right one. You know, like everybody else is wrong, only the Christians are right. And so we need to make everybody a Christian. So they believed it was their duty to go out and turn non-believers or heathens into Christians. So as these Europeans are going on exploration journeys, the church is also sending along what we call missionaries, which was like priests, to convert people to the Christian religion. And then lastly, Europeans were very eager to make new discoveries because of the Renaissance, which was a period of many inventions, many changes in Europe. It's basically considered a time when many philosophers were actually, and academics were doing very, very well. So Europeans just wanted to see what else is out there. There must be something new to discover. And thus this period became known as the Age of Discovery. So I'm going to end it there because I'm already on 14 minutes and 30 seconds. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comment section below. And thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. Remember to take these notes in your book so that when I see you in term 2, it's already there and I can just go over this again. Thank you. Goodbye.